water is really sacred to us. You know, it's life. Here in White Mesa, that's one thing we lack is water, but it's that important that we need to educate people that contamination is not good for life. Mother Earth supports us with life, and life is water. What our elders said from day one, you know, you protect this land. Protect the water because it's gonna protect you.
My name's Colin Larrick. I'm the water quality specialist for the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, and it's my job to make sure the tribe's water resources, surface water and groundwater, are protected into the future. We come here regularly to sample the water and make sure it is safe and at natural conditions. We're concerned about impacts from the uranium mill, which is right across the street. The White Mesa Mill facility is located in southeastern Utah. This is in the heart of the Colorado Plateau in the arid southwest between Arches National Park and Monument Valley, just 3 miles south of the mill. There's also a Mountain Ute tribal community named White Mesa, and water is an extremely important resource here. There's 2 groundwater aquifers that are extremely valuable. They're the only sources of water. The shallowest source of water from the surface is in the Burrow Canyon Formation. That's the formation the tailing cells are constructed into. And the liners at the bottoms of the impoundments are in direct contact with this perched aquifer. The perched aquifer is recharged, or it gets its water from precipitation. Rainwater and snowmelt percolate down into the sandstone formation to a depth of around 100 feet, where it encounters a clay-based layer, the Morrison Formation. It has a higher clay content, and the smaller grain size of the clay makes it more difficult for water to move through it. So when the water encounters that clay layer, it starts to move horizontally or sideways to the edge of the mesa, where it comes out into the environment as springs and seeps.
When we talk about life, life begins with a woman, and life is started with the woman giving birth, and that's where we feel the spiritual part of the spring, because it's giving birth of water to us to help us survive.
These springs and seeps around the edge of the mesa are some of the only water sources in the area. Our concern is that liquids and radioactive toxic waste from these tailing cell impoundments will migrate down into the Burrow Canyon Formation, just like rainwater or snowmelt does, and find its way to these springs. That would be the first route of exposure to the environment, people, wildlife, and plants. We're also concerned about the deeper Navajo aquifer, which lies about 1,200 feet below us, and potential downward migration and contamination of that resource.
The uranium milling industry, the mining industry generally, operates on what's often called a bucket curve. You have a high cost going in where you have to build all your facilities, build your mine, get things started, no income. And then you have a production where the costs actually, most of the time, fall dramatically because now you're operating the machinery. And then at the other end, you have another set where you've got huge costs to clean up and remediate and reclaim, and no income. There's a huge financial incentive to never have to clean up. Where the White Mesa Uranium Mill has become a player is as a low-cost radioactive waste disposal site. So Canada, New Jersey, all kinds of government radioactive waste sites, industrial radioactive waste sites are looking for a place for their waste to go. And that's the business that the White Mesa Uranium Mill is really pushing now. In the early 90s, some folks within the U.S. government at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and various folks in the industry cooked up this idea that, hey, we've got all these uranium mill sites, we've got all these tailing sites, they're radioactive waste dumps. Let's start sending some of our waste there. But the way the laws are set up, you can't just dump radioactive waste in a mill tailing cell. Because what happens is you have these radioactive waste, a lot of times industrial wastes or experimental wastes that have some of the same materials as you would have in mill tailings, but then they have a whole bunch more too. And you're not allowed to dump them in these tailing cells. So what is done is you take and run those through the mill cycle, but at the other side of the mill, it magically becomes uranium mill tailings. And it's now legal for industrial wastes that weren't allowed on this side of the mill to go into the tailings because they went through the mill.
The uranium mill uses a lot of acid and organic solvents to extract uranium from ore and feed material. The process leaves behind a lot of waste material, both liquid and solid, which is stored in large tailings impoundments. Cell 1, 2, and 3 are referred to as the legacy impoundments. These cells were constructed in the early 1980s and have a single 30mm PVC liner underneath. Cell 4A and 4B are the southernmost cells in the tailings system at the facility. Those were constructed relatively recently and have a modern technology with double liner system and leak detection that will allow for detection of any liquids or waste migrating through that liner to the subsurface. Cell 1 has had documented leaks in the recent history, and they've had to replace a significant amount of the liner, mostly around the edge. From the replacement work they did, it was obvious that the liner is in very poor condition. There were many cracks, holes, sections of missing liner. Any liquid migration through the liners would introduce those fluids into this aquifer. We hope never to see contamination from the mill in these springs and seeps. If contamination from the mill did show up at these seeps and springs, these resources would be unusable for the tribe and quite possibly very toxic to wildlife and any type of human use of these resources. The community of White Mesa is located about 2 miles south of us in this direction towards the San Juan River, and the mill facility and tailings impoundments are approximately 1 mile north of us towards the Abajos. Groundwater in the shallow aquifer is flowing from the direction of the Abajo Mountains and the mill facility to the north, south towards the tribal community. This is the closest monitoring well to the tribe's property. What we're seeing in the groundwater right at this location at MW22 is that it's becoming very acidic. The pH has dropped down to as low as 4.5 recently. And along with that, we're seeing a huge spike in a lot of the heavy metals which are in the tailings facility.
If you look at the actual cost that has happened at other sites and what it's going to take to stabilize the White Mesa uranium mill, it will cost, tens of millions, maybe into more than 100 million to be able to do that. If you look at the site in a careful way, which I don't think has been done, and you see a site that has ruins, that's occupied, that's next to a town, more than likely the ultimate fate of that site will end up going to, if they have to transport it any amount of distance, we could be talking hundreds of millions.
People like at the state and government level really need to look at this and really feel what it feels like to be impacted by the underground water being contaminated. Water is so important that it helps us not only with our human form, but even with structure. The meal being there where it's at, you know, and plays a big factor in our community for the future to come. If the springs were to become contaminated, from what I was hearing, it would probably mean that, you know, we'd have to leave our homelands.